Okay. Let me readjust. All right. All right. Good morning and welcome back to our Naturalist. I'm Amanda, and today we'll be previewing my fall course, Mammalogy. But of course, we'll always start off with a thank you to our subscribers. And of course, season 6 is coming up in a few weeks. We're putting together a lovely program as well as some seasonal and annual subscription packages, as well as field trip packages, which will be available soon. So keep an eye out in your inbox for information about those. We have our final field trip of season 5 scheduled for tomorrow. We'll be going to the International Crane Foundation um, for a special tour. Um, if you would like to join us, we'll be meeting at Riverside Park at 9 a.m. To ride up together in the van. You'll need to bring a lunch and $10, preferably in cash. And this goes to the Crane Foundation for the cost of the tour. Of course, subscribers can still attend at no cost um, to the UEC, but that $10 is still required. And then as well as joining us for Mammalogy, hopefully. We hope that you'll join us next week on Tuesday for our bat party. This got rescheduled due to rain, but our new date is going to be next Tuesday, August 27th at 8 p.m., still at Menominee Valley, and there will be snacks, a bat survey, and so many bat facts, including some special bat facts about how bats use trees from science communication intern Emma. But getting on to mammalogy, what I'll cover is kind of an overview of what the course will look like, what I'll cover, as well as just a little bit of background about what mammalogy is, getting into a little bit about um, mammal evolution, mammal biogeography, mammal diversity, um, just kind of a tiny sneak preview of some of what I'll cover in the course. But just to get us started, mammalogy is a branch of zoology that studies mammals specifically. But what even is a mammal? The word mammalia, which is the class that mammals fall under, comes from the Latin word mamma, which is also teat or pap. Mammals are a vertebrate class of animal, falling down here. And they share 4 defining characteristics: mammary glands, fur or hair, a brain region called the neocortex, and 3 middle ear bones. And I'll get into details on these a little bit later. In the Mammalogy series, we'll cover a variety of topics, including diversity, as I spoke about a little bit earlier. So what mammals are even out there? We'll also get into evolution, so how mammals specifically evolved, what adaptations allowed them to survive and thrive, their anatomy, so kind of getting into more about those defining characteristics, as well as what features make them unique and what features distinguish the specific orders from each other. Getting into biogeography, so where mammals are now, how did they get there? Ecology, what role they play in the environment, how to identify mammals out in the field, as well as how we identify their track and sign. field research techniques, how we study mammals, um, and what we use out in the field, um, as well as conservation. So what ecological challenges mammals face today. You might be asking what qualifies me to teach these things. I've spent the last 8 years studying and working with mammals, as you can see from these many pictures of me primarily working with coyotes. But I've worked on not only coyotes, I've worked with raccoons, possums, foxes, bobcats, mountain lions, mule deer, squirrels, rabbits, rats, skunks, um, mice, and more. Researching their movements, their diseases, their behaviors, their diet, and so much more. I have 2 degrees, I have several scientific publications, and a very lengthy thesis, all focused on mammals. So I would say that I know a good amount about mammals. Um, you might also be thinking, how would this be different from one of our typical backyard naturalist lectures? Um, Mammals have been a popular topic on Backyard Naturalist. I looked back over our YouTube playlist that our science communication intern Emma so graciously put together for us. And of our over 200 episodes, 21 of them have been focused on one mammal or another. Um, so how will this course be any different from looking at one of these mammals in particular? Um, while our Friday lectures are great, the course is going to be a lot more structured. It has specific learning outcomes that will be evaluated not through tests, but through optional surveys. And it will be much more similar to a college level course. By the end of the course, participants should be able to identify mammals, particularly those living in Wisconsin, and describe their ecology, their behavior, and their habitat requirements. They should be able to summarize key characteristics of mammals more generally, as well as distinguishing features um, of the major mammal lineages. So those different orders. They should also be able to describe current research techniques that are used to study mammals, and understand conservation issues that mammals face. Rather than sharing specifics and fun facts about particular mammals, like we do on those Backyard Naturalist episodes, the course will really dive a lot deeper into groups as a whole, looking at the unifying characteristics and ecologies of specific orders. It will also give participants the opportunity to explore scientific research techniques and see how mammalogists actually study mammals in the field, and give them hands-on practice to actually identifying mammals, either through things like scat and tracks, or using like hair or skulls and teeth, or through things like camera trapping. But getting back into mammals more specifically, the class Mammalia contains 29 orders, and over 6,000 living species, extant species. It can be broken into 3 infraclasses. These down here, which are monotremes, marsupials, and placental mammals. And excuse me, I'll talk about each one of these. Monotremes, backing up a little bit. The infraclasses are essentially broken up more so by the way they give birth, their reproductive strategy. because that's oftentimes when people talk about mammals, they say one of the unifying characteristics of mammals is that they give live birth. Well, that's not entirely true of all mammals. Um, a more accurate way to describe mammals is that they all have mammary glands, like we looked at earlier. Um, these infraclasses group mammals in a way where we can lay out how they give birth. So, for example, monotremes lay eggs rather than giving birth. They've retained that character, similar to reptiles and amphibians and birds. Um, marsupials, so pouched mammals like kangaroos, possums, these give birth to very underdeveloped offspring that reside in the pouch for a prolonged period of time. And then placental mammals, these are pretty much all other mammals, including humans. Um, these are the animals that give live birth. Um, marsupials do too, but placental mammals give live birth at a later state in development. The fetus is carried in utero for a longer term. Getting into monotremes specifically, um, monotremes are derived from Greek words. I won't try to pronounce them, but essentially they mean single and whole, which are referring to the cloaca. Monotremes have retained cloacal, um, the cloaca as a retained character. Um, there are only 5 extant species, 5 living species, all in Australia. These are animals like platypus and echidna. They lay eggs through that cloaca. They do still nurse their young, but they lack nipples. They lactate through mammary glands via just like openings in their skin. We'll get into that details of that a little bit later. The young are called puggles, which is very cute and adorable. They have spurs on their hind limbs. In platypuses, these contain venom. And then all monotremes also lack teeth as adults. Marsupials, so possums, kangaroos, koalas, and more, comes from the word marsupium, which is the technical term for that abdominal pouch. It in turn is borrowed from the Latin marsupium, which is ultimately derived from an ancient Greek marsupios, which means pouch. They give birth to underdeveloped offspring. They're equivalent to about an 8 to 12 week human fetus. In marsupials, gestation is roughly a few days, 2 weeks. In marsupials, their young are called joeys. About 70% of the living species of this group reside on the Australian continent. They have very small and compact skulls. And what's really interesting about marsupials is their reproductive tract is doubled. It's just an interesting fun fact. But like I mentioned, these include things like possums, koalas, and kangaroos, bandicoots, Tasmanian devils, quolls, and a few other species. And then placental mammals is basically everything else. This is derived from a Latin word for a type of cake, which essentially means flat slab-like, which is a reference to the round and flat appearance of the placenta in humans. Placental mammals um, carry their fetus in utero until a very late stage in development. It encompasses most mammals. They have a very wide opening at the bottom of the pelvis to accommodate giving live birth at this later stage in development. And then all of them have uh, the presence of a corpus callosum, which is essentially um, this structure that lies between the two hemispheres of the brain and allows for communication between the hemispheres. Essentially allows for higher level thinking. But like I said, it includes pretty much all other mammals. Um, Bats, humans, seals, aardvarks, manatees, anteaters, squirrels, pangolins, elephants, whales, hedgehogs, pandas, zebras. I don't know what this is. Caribou, elephant shrews, armadillos, and pika, and there's so many other animals um, that it contains. Within the class Mammalia, when we're looking beyond those infraclasses, we can look at orders. The largest orders of mammals in the largest orders are rodents, rodentia, followed by Chiroptera, which are bats, and then a couple others. Hedgehogs, moles, and shrews come third, primates, even-toed ungulates, and then carnivores. But rodents and bats are the two largest orders, contain the most recorded species. So how did mammals get here? How did they evolve? Mammals evolved from this fossorial burrowing mammal-like creature called a cyaodont. This guy essentially gave rise to the mammals of today. Earlier mammals first arose in the Triassic period. But mammals really took off due to this theory of a nocturnal bottleneck. Essentially, due to competition, cyaodonts, these little guys, are fossorial burrowing mammals, transitioned to nocturnality. They decreased in size. They evolved a lot of nocturnal features, including a four-chambered heart to maintain a higher metabolism, which essentially all of these changes is what gave rise to the mammals of today. Following the extinction, essentially at the end of the Mesozoic, the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs, mammals really started to explode and expand into new ecological niches. So this is where we see the rise of our crown mammals. Like our crown orders are really like our carnivores, our rodents, pretty much all of those placental mammals. But we also get our monotremes and our marsupials. This is also likely where lactation evolved, but very little is known about where roughly lactation evolved because soft tissue is very rarely preserved in fossils. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint that. But getting into the anatomy of mammals, what makes a mammal, going back to those defining characteristics, we have that the most mammary glands. All mammals have fur or hair, this brain region called the neocortex, and those three middle ear bones. Mammary glands are essentially sweat glands that have been specialized to produce milk. Um, in monotremes that don't have nipples, they're slightly different than in marsupials or placental mammals. Since monotremes don't have nipples, they have just these specialized sweat glands that produce milk, and they essentially just sweat out milk and feed their young by sweating milk. That's kind of gross. We'll move on. Uh, moving on to fur or hair. All mammals have fur or hair. There are different specialized types of fur or hair, but all of it is made of keratin. Um, and thinking, like, if you really think about it, you may think like, oh, well, like this mammal doesn't have fur or hair, but hair can be very specialized. Um, there's like the definitive type, which is your typical what you think of when you think of fur, um, like on this lemur here, or like on your cat or your dog. Um, but it's also things like whiskers, or the bristles on like this peccary or on a lion's mane. It's also things like quills. Quills are just specialized hairs. Um, so even things like seals and whales still have hairs. Um, they're just very, very specialized in certain cases. All mammals also have this brain region called the neocortex. It's thought to be involved in higher level functioning. What they say it's responsible for is things like sensory perception, cognition, generation of motor commands, spatial reasoning, language, sleep, memory, and learning processes. And what originally was thought is that because mammals have this region and all these things happen in this region, mammals are the only species capable of these things. Um, and we now know that that's not true. Um, Other species outside of mammals are capable of this higher level processing, including things like language, um, and sensory perception, cognition, learning. Um, but they just do it in a different part of their brain. So there's a lot of debate on what to call this region. It just, the neocortex within the mammalian brain, while it is responsible for these things, um, it is structured in a very unique way. So there are other structures within the reptile brain, within the bird brain, that are responsible for this higher level functioning, but from a structural standpoint, don't look the same. Um, which is why they've decided to keep it named the neocortex, even though um, other brains are capable of these types of thinking. Mammals also have three middle ear bones, whereas reptiles in particular only have one. Um, Essentially, this allows mammals to hear a wider range of high frequency airborne vibrations. Um, Whereas with reptiles and amphibians, their hearing depends a lot on the conduction of low frequency vibration um, through the bony structures of their head and their jaw, um, or through the ground. Um, so it really allowed mammals to make that transition, to a lot of different ecological niches, in developing these three inner ear bones. Getting into biogeography. Biogeography is essentially, it's a lot of things. It encompasses a lot of different fields of study, including how living things are distributed. Excuse me. Biogeography is how living things are distributed, geography, and why. One of the things it can tell us is how things evolved and dispersed, um, but it can also tell us a lot of other things. With mammals, one very interesting and classic example in biogeography is with marsupials. What I mentioned earlier with marsupials is that 70% of the living species of marsupials exist in Australia. What we know from genetics and fossil record is that marsupials did not evolve in Australia. What we know is that they originated in South America and dispersed to Australia through Antarctica around 50 million years ago, when the continents were together, essentially, before they had broken apart, and looked more like the modern world. So that's a classic example of biogeography. Another is with opossums and a lot of other mammal species and other species that we have, involving the Great Biotic Interchange. If you haven't heard of this, essentially by the time the dinosaurs went extinct, about 66 million years ago, South America was separated from the rest of the world's continents. But the extinction of the dinosaurs left a lot of ecological gaps, which enabled mammals, our existing life forms, as well as new life forms, to recolonize these long held niches. And a lot of mammal orders that are familiar to us, like elephants, other hooved mammals, carnivores like cats and dogs, they soon kind of colonized like the entire globe and became dominant across Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America, pretty much until present day. And we're pretty much absent from South America. And South America is really inaccessible to them. But this isolation really fostered the evolution of a lot of really unique lineages, like within marsupials, also things like sloths, anteaters, porcupines, armadillos. And it gave rise to a lot of wildlife that were found nowhere else on Earth. And until about 2.8 million years ago, there wasn't a lot of interchange until the Isthmus of Panama essentially arose. And then we started to see major shifts, and migrations between the two continents. And so we would see species of armadillo and ground sloth making their way north, whereas we get horses and camels and cats and dogs and bears making their way south. Um, South American populations brought New World porcupines, armadillos, anteaters. North American populations brought things like sloth bears, peccaries, tapirs, jaguars. All of those are relatively new species to South America. Um, and so while today much of South America's mammalian fauna comprises animals that descended from North America, only 3 South American species have found success in the north. And those are porcupines, the Virginia opossum, and the 9-banded armadillo, which is really restricted to southern states in the US. There is a little bit of a caveat there in that a lot of South American species have found a lot of success in Central America. So their migration was somewhat limited, but somewhat successful. Getting into diversity and ecology, some of the things that we'll really focus on in the course are the mammals of Wisconsin and North America more generally. In Wisconsin specifically, going through some of our larger orders of mammals, there are 27 species of rodents native. Well, I don't want to necessarily say native. There are 27 species of rodents that you can find in Wisconsin. Rodents, well, going back, let's not jump ahead. 27 species that you can find, including things like muskrats, beavers, groundhog, 13-line ground squirrels, porcupines, flying squirrels. This includes a lot of different species, some of which we've done Backyard Naturalists on. At least these 3 down here, I'm pretty sure. Groundhogs, beavers, and porcupines. Like I mentioned earlier, the order Rodentia is the largest order of mammals, and they are also the most widespread geographically. They're the only terrestrial placental mammal to have colonized Australia without human intervention, essentially meaning they weren't brought there either as a domesticated or invasive species. They have adapted to almost all terrestrial habitats on Earth. They are primarily herbivores. Some are omnivorous, but for the most part, they play a lot of very important ecological roles. Within North America specifically, beavers create and maintain wetlands. Prairie dogs do a lot with nutrient cycling. They aerate the soil. However, other rodents are largely considered to be pests, including beavers and prairie dogs. Bioptera are bats. We have 8 species in Wisconsin. You can learn more about them if you come to the bat party. But they're the second largest order of mammals, and they are the only mammal capable of true flight. And they are more agile than most birds. They are comprised 20% of all classified mammals worldwide. And they have a huge diet range. So they eat fruit, insects, pollen, nectar, small mammals, amphibians, reptiles, blood, all kinds of things. And like rodents, they are widespread and adapted to a huge range of habitats. And they are a major reservoir species for many zoonotic diseases, as are rodents, but not too as weren't um, not as great a degree in rodents for zoonotic diseases. With our hedgehogs, moles, and shrews, Elipophyta, this this word means truly fat and blind. They're mostly subterranean insectivores. In Wisconsin, we have 8 species of only shrews and moles. They're very cute. Um, not a whole lot of not a whole lot of information is known about um, them as an order. And then we have lagomorphs, which are rabbits and hares. These are separate from rodents for reasons I'll get into on the next slide. We have 3 species, eastern cottontail, white-tailed jackrabbit, and snowshoe hare. Rabbits and hares, including jackrabbits as well as pika, are in this group, and they differ from rodents due to the differing rodent number of incisors. They're also strictly herbivorous, which is unlike many rodents. And we have our even-toed ungulates, also have 3 species, moose, white-tailed deer, and elk in Wisconsin. These bear weight equally on either 2 or 4 toes, which is why they're called even-toed ungulates. This group includes all ungulates except horses, rhinos, and tapirs. And they digest plant cellulose in 1 or more chambers of their stomach rather than their intestine. And cetaceans, which include whale, dolphin, and porpoises, actually fall within this group. And they're most closely related to hippos, which is a fun fact I always like to share. Some of them have cranial appendages like horns or antlers or ossicones, which are like the little tiny things you would see on giraffes, or pronghorns. And then we get into one of my favorite groups, carnivora, or carnivores. We have 19 species in Wisconsin. These include species like badgers, raccoons, fishers, bear, bobcat, stoat, coyote, mountain lion. I don't know what else I'm missing. But they specialize primarily in eating flesh. However, their diets vary super, super widely. There are some carnivores that are very omnivorous. There are some carnivores that are pretty herbivorous. They're found on every major landmass. And they're made up of 2 major suborders. Feliformia, which are our cat-like carnivores, and Caeniformia, which are our dog-like carnivores. And then, of course, we have our marsupials, which we only have one of, our possum, Virginia opossum. These are our pouched mammals. And one of my favorite fun facts about our pouched mammals is that they have many, many teeth, more teeth than most mammals, usually 40 to 50, which is significantly more teeth than, which is usually like 2 times the number of teeth that most mammals have. So that's our diversity of mammals within Wisconsin. Getting into conservation itself, what kind of issues mammals face. Mammals are at risk, like many other groups. Um, I wouldn't say they're the most at risk group of all animals. There are certainly more threatened groups, but certainly in need of help. Um, one of the benefits of mammals when it comes to conservation is that a lot of them are very charismatic. Um, a lot of them are large and cute and fuzzy, um, which is very has a certain charm to it, which usually attracts a lot of funds for conservation. Um, Whereas things like reptiles and invertebrates, not so cute and cuddly, don't often attract those kind of funds, or they have some kind of negative reputation that hinders conservation. Some mammals are like that. Fortunately, most mammals, especially the ones in most dire need, um, are not like that. But some of the major threats that mammals are facing are, of course, things like habitat loss, and fragmentation. These are kind of universal threats, that all animals are facing. Um, Agriculture, livestock, climate change, um, invasive species. Uh, a lot of mammals themselves are invasive species, arguably one of the most invasive species in the world, that threaten both mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, insects, kind of everything. Our domestic cats, um, and also disease, um, another domestic cat issue when it comes to conservation. It's toxoplasma, but also things like white nose syndrome, which is a fungus that's really impacting bat populations. Um, Leptospirosis in Channel Island foxes, plague in black-footed ferrets really impacts conservation action, in already endangered species. And then, of course, things like poaching, um, with like pangolins, rhinos, even things in the US like pronghorn, where people just take more than their license allows or don't even have a license. Um, in terms of large mammals, poaching is the biggest threat, but competition with livestock disease, hybridization with livestock is definitely an issue. Um, and then habitat loss and conflict and civil unrest are major threats to large mammals, herbivores in particular. Um, and when they say conflict, they don't just mean human conflict. They mean conflict with humans, not just human conflict between humans, but conflict with humans. Um, Things like animals moving into more urban spaces, coyotes taking cats, jaguars taking livestock, squirrels moving into your attic, bears getting into your trash, deer or rabbits munching on your garden, even beavers, can be considered conflict animals. Um, all of these are different conservation issues that mammals face, um, that we will get into more in the final week of mammalogy. But if you want more, then that's too bad. Um, because it's after 10. And so if you want more, you'll have to join me on Tuesday evenings from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. Starting September 24th at Riverside Park. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.